Nice to see all of you here. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Asma Naeem. I'm the Eddie C. and Cecilia Brown Chief Curator here at the Baltimore Museum of Art. Welcome to what's going to be a wonderful discussion tonight. It's my sincere pleasure to be here to talk about the various issues that we're going to be addressing here. So how many of you have seen Ebony Patterson's powerful exhibition for Little Whispers upstairs? Wonderful. And for those of you who have not seen it, yes, you must go. Run, do not walk. We have been proud to host Ebony's powerful exhibition, which is on view, by the way, until April 7th, so time is ticking. And this exhibition includes an immersive installation featuring Patterson's work titled "And Babies Too." And this work is a memorial to children who have been killed in violent crimes. It features a glittering tapestry that's loaded with symbols of childhood, along with 18 pairs of cast glass shoes, fake butterflies, and what are really, I think, one of the most touching aspects of the show, papier-mâché balloons in a plush pink environment. So before introducing our speakers, I want to tell you about another upcoming program that addresses art and social justice, something that we are keen here to do at the Baltimore Museum of Art, explore this intersection of art and social justice. On April 24th, the BMA will continue our series entitled The Necessity of Tomorrows. And that event on April 24th will feature the internationally acclaimed artist Mickalene Thomas and filmmaker, musician, and activist Boots Riley. And Boots Riley recently came out with the movie Sorry to Bother You. It should be a fascinating discussion. That conversation will be moderated by the director of our museum, Christopher Bedford. So leading up to this exciting event, we will host 2 free screenings of Boots Riley's 2018 film, Sorry to Bother You, in the BMA Auditorium, April 13th and April 17th at 7 p.m. So we look forward to seeing you there. Tonight's event is generously sponsored by the Joshua Johnson Council. And could we have members of the council raise their hands in the audience? Yes. The Joshua Johnson Council is one of the oldest African-American museum groups in the United States, and it's an integral and vibrant part of the Baltimore Museum of Art for almost 4 decades. It's an affiliate group, and it's committed to broadening the public experience of art made by American artists of African descent, and brings together arts professionals, artists, and collectors to share experiences and make professional connections and engage with our initiatives here at the museum. So if you are not a member of the Joshua Johnson Council, I would highly urge you to become one. I've already met several people here tonight who are interested. Please feel free to reach out to a BMA member, a BMA staff, and to inquire about how to join. Now, shifting to tonight's conversation, I'm pleased to introduce tonight's speakers. Erika Bridgeford. What a powerful, powerful person in our community. She's a Baltimore-based mediator, activist, and community organizer who was named Marylander of the Year by the Baltimore Sun in 2017. Since 2005, Erika has been the Director of Training for Community Mediation Maryland, and that organization provides training for 17 community mediation centers, as well as for state agencies, national conferences, and incarcerated men and women. In May of 2017, Erika conceived of and co-organized the first Baltimore Ceasefire, a citywide call for 72 hours without murder. It also encourages life-affirming events throughout ceasefire weekends. This effort, also known as the Baltimore Peace Challenge, has received global attention for unifying Baltimore in a way that hasn't been seen in decades. At a time when Baltimore was averaging 1 homicide every 19 hours, let's think about that. That is just so horrible to think. of every 19 hours, the city experienced 67 hours without murder during the first ceasefire weekend. Since then, Baltimore has held quarterly ceasefires, with each weekend experiencing less violence. Our other speaker is Ebony G Patterson. She is a mixed media artist, internationally acclaimed, whose work has been shown in museums and galleries all over the world. Ebony has had solo exhibitions and projects at the Perez Art Museum in Miami, the Studio Museum in Harlem, the Atlanta Contemporary Art Center, and the Museum of Art and Design in New York, among others. Her work was featured in the 32nd Sao Paulo Biennale, the 12th Havana Biennale, Prospect 3 New Orleans, and the Jamaica Biennale. Her work is also included in a number of public collections, including the Pennsylvania Academy of the Fine Arts, the National Museum of Art at Duke University, the Speed Art Museum in Louisville, and the National Gallery of Jamaica in Kingston. Ebony is currently an artist in residence at the Crystal Bridges Museum of American Art in Bentonville, Arkansas. She has received numerous awards, including the United States Artist Award, and has received grants from the Tiffany Foundation, the Joan Mitchell Foundation, the Andy Warhol Foundation, and she was also a 2017 Artist in Residence at the Rauschenberg Foundation. Our moderator this evening is Cecilia Wichmann, Associate Curator of Contemporary Art at the Baltimore Museum of Art and Curator of the Ebony Patterson Show. Cecilia joined the museum as Assistant Curator in fall of 2017. In addition to this show, she has curated exhibitions on Stephen Towns and Veronica Janssens, and an exhibition of works by Joyce J. Scott and her mother, Elizabeth Talford Scott, opening in May. So another thing for you to mark your calendars for. Prior to joining the BMA, Cecilia led the University of Maryland's Stamp Gallery, an experimental exhibition space for contemporary art, and served as curator and advisor of its innovative contemporary art purchasing program. So before I turn the program over to Cecilia, I'm going to go a little off script here. Because what we have here in our speakers tonight is bravery. It takes bravery to be an artist, to express yourself, to start with a blank page. I think many of us can see that readily. It takes bravery to be a voice for the voiceless and to advocate for change when there's so much pain around you. But like anything that is worth considering or inviting genuflection, bravery cannot exist without its paradoxical counterpart, and that is vulnerability. It's precisely this combination of vulnerability and bravery that I find so powerful in both of our speakers tonight, and I think that you will respond to immediately as soon as you start hearing them speak. So I want to commend our speakers, and I want you to please welcome me, join me in welcoming these two speakers. First, Cecilia Wichmann is going to do a brief video interlude.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Cecilia. Thank you so much for being here tonight. It's wonderful to see all of you in the audience. And I just want to give you a sense of our program this evening. So before Erika and Ebony join me on stage, they've asked me each one to play a video. So this pair of videos will introduce both of their work, give us some sort of groundwork separately to see where each is coming from. In Erika's case, it will be a short documentary that talks about her work with the Baltimore Ceasefire. And in Ebony's case, we'll be actually looking at a work of video art that was recently exhibited at the Perez Art Museum in Miami, and we are sharing this evening in Baltimore for the first time. So I'll share those videos with you now, and then we'll take our seats, we'll have a conversation, and then open up to questions from the audience. So now for the technical. We're going to begin with Erika's video.
last year, the murder rate was higher than it's ever been. And so I started fussing about, somebody should call a ceasefire. And then I realized that I was that mad because it was something I needed to try to do myself. My part of it was we should celebrate life. People want to celebrate life in Baltimore. We are not savages. We love life. We just don't often get a chance to remember how much we love life. And given the opportunity, people are going to choose life. And so it became the first weekend of every quarter, except in May, Mother's Day weekend is when we do it in May to honor parents who lost their children to violence. It purposely does not have anybody's organization attached to it because it belongs to Baltimore, so that each person who does any little thing in participation owns it. It belongs to them. And so the outreach leading up is just about putting flyers and posters everywhere and talking to people about the ceasefire, but also talking to people about how they respond to conflict and what's going on in their lives so we can help each other address the root causes of violence. Because if you're having a conversation with somebody about what's going on in their life, you probably know of two things you can refer them to help. And if you don't know, you can send us an email. And it takes one Facebook post to get 50 million answers to where to get resources for anything in Baltimore. The ceasefire doesn't end because somebody gets shot or killed. We don't look at it as the entire city broke their promise. No. That person did not keep the ceasefire, but we are still asking the rest of the city, don't use this murder as a reason to be violent again. Use it as a reason to vibrate higher. Every time somebody gets killed in Baltimore, we go to the space where the murder happened. We pour light and love into the entire neighborhood. We burn sage to bless the whole space and help remove negative energy. Put our loving thoughts into the smoke to carry it through the neighborhood. But then also the actual murder space, getting on the concrete, to bless it, to love it, to rub it, to kiss it, to have a conversation with that person, that their life matters, that they have not died in pain, that we are gonna remember them, we see them, we're gonna carry them with us in every step of our journey. We apologize to them for creating a world that this is their demise. So it's a way to make it a sacred space and to honor life, but also to really think purposefully about the person who committed the murder and to send love and light to their journey. Because if we don't do that, we're not going to heal a murder epidemic. Pay attention to their part in America's violent culture. Because that looks different for different people. And so you can wash your hands of it if you just think it's about shooters, right? But when you really ask yourself, well, how am I violent in my thoughts? How am I violent on social media? When we really think about it that way, we all participate in this energy that says power over instead of power with, and might is right, and survival of the fittest. We participate in that in different ways. And let's say you think you don't, then your life, however you're living it, probably benefits from a violent system of oppression that then puts other people in violent neighborhoods. How are you showing up in the world? What do you think needs to be fixed in this world? Are you just mad about it and saying what they should do? Or do you ever stop and remember that you are they? I was born in Baltimore. I grew up in West Baltimore. So when I was 12, one of my friends was killed and I saw him dying on the sidewalk. And then like again when I was 14 and then when I was 15. Then it felt like a steady stream of like maybe once a year. And then as I got older, 3 or 4 people in a year, sometimes 2 funerals in one day during the year. As long as I have breath in my body, nobody gets left behind.
So now we're going to share with you Three Kings Weep by Ebony G Patterson. This work is dated 2017-2018.
If we must die, let it not be like hogs, hunted and penned in an inglorious spot, while round us bark the mad and hungry dogs, making their mock at our accursed lot. If we must die, oh, let us nobly die, so that our precious blood may not be shed in vain. Then even the monsters we defy shall be constrained to honor us, though dead. O kinsmen, we must meet the common foe. Though far outnumbered, let us show us brave, and for their 1,000 blows, deal one death blow. What though before us lies the open grave? Like men will face the murderous, cowardly pack, pressed to the wall, dying but fighting back.
Please join me in welcoming Erika Bridgeford and Ebony G Patterson to the stage. So, is there anything that either of you want to start by saying in reaction to these two videos?
So this is my first time seeing your piece, and it impacts me very similarly to the way the room does. You have a defiance about the way you articulate what goes on really around death and murder specifically, a defiance about what grief can be and all that it is. The humanity that you bring is just amazing. Watching this piece, like I'm backstage trying not to scream, like, yes, you better put on your jewels, you better, you know what I mean? Like, you better cock your hat to the side. Like, it's just, oh my goodness.
And I'm really honored to be sharing the stage with Erika. And the kind of work that you do is so difficult, but then at the same time so incredibly necessary. So many times when we do things or we do the kind of work that we do, somebody will always ask in an audience, in a forum like this, like, what do you think we should do? Or what do you think I should do? And I always try to say to people, you have to respond to whatever feels most urgent for you. Nobody can determine what that is. Making that work, Three Kings, every time, I remember when it took me a long time to make it because of a number of technical things that I needed to understand because this was still fairly new material to me. But I remember when it finally came together, I cried. I feel like every time I watch it, I cry. I was watching it backstage again, and I cried. And then the way it's shown in Perez is that it's shown in a space that's very chapel-like. So the side walls are also tilted. The room is very short. It's not more than about 8 feet deep, and there's a bench that's not much higher than this table, and you are literally sitting at the feet of these three young men. When I first started making that work, the idea first for me was, I was responding to an article that I had read that was conducted amongst doctors at the University of Virginia, and it was around 2015 when they were being asked about how they treated their patients of color, the differences in treatment. And the doctors believe that patients of color experience very little to no pain. And I just felt like if you are in the field of care and your responsibility is to care, and you have these preconceived ideas about what the potential of pain can exist in a body, then how can you truly care? And then also on top of that, then what does that also mean, and where does that also come from? And to kind of examine or to ask the questions around like, well, this is all a legacy that we've all inherited in terms of colonialism. The idea that certain bodies have a particular value. Some bodies are dignified, some bodies are worth defending, and others are not. And what happens when you walk in a space like that, this is your existence, and that this is the perception from the outside. How do you then, in your just daily existence, which is an act of defiance, then push right back at that?
When living is just an act of defiance.
Right. And so, at first the video was supposed to be, like the men would sit dressed and then they would reveal themselves. Like, what more do I have to do in order for you to see me, to see my vulnerability, to see the possibility of my full humanity.
Complexity.
Exactly. And then I thought, no, why should they have to do that? And then thinking about also to the act of crowning, that is something that is done to you, and these three young men are doing it to themselves, right? So they're claiming their dignity, they're claiming their kingliness through the garments that are adorning and decorating their own bodies, and then at the same time crowning themselves as a last act, knowing what is imminent and what may be coming to meet them.
Erika, these expectations around care and grieving in public space, are at the core of your work as well. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so around the world, and specifically in Baltimore, and places like Baltimore, when Black people are killed, it's just like, oh, well, condolences to the family, and then you just go on about your day and do whatever it is you're doing. And then there's this weird thing that happens where, unless a police officer kills you, right? So if a police officer kills a Black person, then there's a different level of community grieving and response and outrage. And so it just sends these very weird and problematic messages that we're supposed to just be dying left and right. And that it's okay for that to happen. It's natural and normal for that to happen. Meanwhile, with each person that gets killed, hundreds of people are impacted, right? Their family, their friends, their loved ones, their community. And we walk around with all of this unhealed trauma constantly. And in this thing of dehumanizing Black people, we are taught to just suck it up, right? We're taught that you just push through it. You're not supposed to feel it too deeply. But also, just in surviving America, you don't have time to stop and grieve a lot of times because you're trying to survive. So all of that stuff is happening at the same time. And so the sacred space work that we do is to have a different reaction and response to murder, that we are responding as if every single life actually matters. That when somebody is literally snatched out of their body that way, that we all feel it and we all pause for a moment to say, wait a minute, we lost somebody. And this matters, and their light is still a thing that exists with us, and we need that light, so we need to nurture it, we need to honor it, and that each space should be a sacred space. So this thing about blood being in the concrete where somebody fell, that their body should not be the only body that laid in that space. We should bring our life-filled, our love-filled bodies to that same space so that they didn't go that way alone. And it's important for our tears to hit the same concrete, right, to bless this space where blood was. Recently, somebody who I didn't know asked me about the work, and she said, she asked me, like, so what made you start doing that? And I said, well, God said it needed to be done. That's the only thing that I have in my being, that it was just something that we needed to be doing, to not have these dark holes all over the city, that murder didn't have the last say in these spaces, but love and light had the last say in these spaces. And she said, that's really interesting because the Bible says that the ground still cries out where Cain killed Abel. And so it's amazing, right? Right? Because blood hitting the ground, right? And so that just like gave me all the chills. So yeah, it's us acknowledging that Baltimore deserves more than to just have this dark energy and these holes that people go out of their way to avoid going to these spaces, that we need to leave love in those spaces.
And in those spaces, people continue to live and walk the path to school.
Right. So the trauma is still there in their neighborhood, right? And so what's amazing, if you think about the blight that's also in a lot of these communities. So there's a liquor store on the corner, there's a chicken box place, there's blight, and then there's blood hitting the concrete. Right, and so just like they have to walk, people don't really think about how traumatizing it is and what it says to you about your worth when you walk past abandoned houses all day long, and that's your whole neighborhood. And so that same thing is happening when murder happens in a space. It's somebody's job to put the crime tape up when a murder happens, but we go to a lot of spaces and there's still tape somewhere up, right? And community members are just walking past it, right? And so we take the tape down when we get there, like, no, this is not acceptable that we just, right, live in. And so the fact that people are still living in a neighborhood where there was this kind of trauma, trees have almost the exact same genetic code as humans do, right? And so when we get to the space, we sage and bless the trees as well, because humans are absorbing this trauma. Every living thing in this space is absorbing the trauma. And it's not right, it's not fair, there's nothing about it that is humane, that nobody shows up. And you shouldn't have to wait until you get the phone call about your family member or your loved one. And that's a big message. I love when I'm in front of white people so I can tell them that they are white. Because it's something that you know, if you have a certain privilege, you're not thinking about it, and you don't understand that violence is actually an epidemic. It's not just something that's about blackness. If you do to any group of people what has been done to black and brown people, you do get the same result all over the world. And so I'm going to be very pissed, and all of my language will have to be bleeped out on the news when more white people are being murdered, and suddenly it's an epidemic, the way that it happened with the opioid epidemic, right? That we were saying it was an epidemic, right? Before your babies were dying, we were saying it was an epidemic, right? And so that same thing is happening with murder. You can't look at an epidemic and think it's never going to touch you. You live in one of the most, if not the most violent countries in the world. So you cannot think that violence is not going to meet you, right, in a very personal way.
Your statement in the video that if you have a narrative you believe in your mind that this is irrelevant to you, you are benefiting from a system.
It means your life literally is standing on the backs of others. I love when people say, "Oh, just pull yourself up by your bootstraps." I'm like, you saying that? Well, I don't have shoes, and my mother made your boots.
So I'm wondering if we can move into holding these thoughts close, move into this particular installation that Ebony created. And maybe I'll ask Erika first if you can share with us some of your responses when you walked into that space, and then Ebony, if you can talk us through the work.
Sure.
Yeah, so for me, defiance was the word that came to mind, because from my understanding, the way the murders of these children had been reported, their names weren't being said, their lives were being problematized, they were being talked about as if they were adults. And so the innocence, right? So again, there's no innocence, no humanity, no complexity. And so I love, first of all, these butterflies just took me all the way out. And especially because for me, how butterflies are such a symbol of freedom. I have a butterfly tattooed on my body for that reason, about happiness and freedom and joy. And for these butterflies to all be gathered in that one space, it looks like that they came to stand witness, right? To say, yes, this absolutely matters, and shame on all of y'all for not noticing how much this matters. So we're gonna gather here where you can't ignore all of us in a bunch, right? And then, first of all, the brilliance that you can do all of this, right? The tapestry, you blew the glass, you know what I mean? I'm like, who can do, like, what is her brain made of?
Erika, you killed me.
Like, the paper mache balloons, like, it's just amazing. So the shoes having so much personality. I purposely wore pearls and bling so I could match the thing, by the way. The shoes having so much personality, the spikes, the jewels, the, like, the sassiness, the dopeness, and that's the thing, right? That black people around the world, our culture is celebrated, and if white people love black people as much as they love black culture, we would be living in a different world, right? And so, y'all welcome, y'all can use that. And so these shoes have so much dopeness in them. The balloons underneath struck me because in Baltimore, that's a thing, right? When people die, we put balloons in the space where the person has been killed. And so children think it's always somebody's birthday, right? Because they see balloons, they're like, oh, it must be everybody's birthday in this neighborhood. And anything, my mom talks a lot about how anything can trigger you to go put balloons at that space. It doesn't have to be the death anniversary. The wind could have just blown a certain way that reminded you of that person, and you go put balloons in that space. So first of all, I love the fact that your breath is in every balloon, right? And then held there. And that how that connects with what, like, the most gangster thug will come up to a space with balloons and a white teddy bear, you know, and put it in a murder space because that love matters. And then all of these different kind of toys that you chose really blew me away, because some of them are just fun, but some of them are war toys, right? And how early we expose children, their body memory, to playing with violent imagery, right? And we give them that memory. It's just, you said so much, and all at the same time, you dare people not to humanize these children.
Thank you, Erika. I don't know if I should say anything else. Well, how do I follow that? In 2015, I used to teach at the University of Kentucky for a number of years. And between 2014 and 2016, I was on sabbatical, and I spent that time at home in Jamaica, just working. And around that same time, too, I had been invited by Tyler School of Art to consider making a work in collaboration with the school's gallery. So they were like, hey, we have these resources. What do you want to do? And let's make it happen, which is always a dream for an artist. And so I'd always loved the possibility of working in glass, but glass is an incredibly expensive material to work in, and I never had access to facilities. And Tyler had this. During the time I was also in Jamaica, I was also working on a show at the same time for the Studio Museum. And I started photographing a number of children around the idea they were just kids. That was actually the name of the show. The show was called They Were Just Kids. And so I was, I was really interested in this idea of picturing Black children just doing everyday things. And also too, at this time, there were lots of reports in the media about police killings, and the police killings were always of these young boys. So Tamir Rice's murder was very popular at this time. Mike Brown's murder was very popular at this time. And what was also interesting to me is that each time these boys were talked about, they were never described as boys. They were not allowed to be seen as boys. Their years were advanced. Their years were advanced during the act, which is part of the reason why they were perceived as being threats. And their years continued to advance in the way the media covered them, in the kinds of photographs that they chose to release into the world as a marker for who these young boys could have or would have been. And I just really wanted to use this opportunity to just think about innocence and what that looks like on bodies that are not allowed to be seen as innocent. So the 4 images that you're seeing behind us, they're the only ones in the show that were kind of these singular portraits, and each of them are named or titled rather after the age of the child. So the one on the very far, my right, is 12. The girl in the middle is 14. Next to the girl is the boy, and across his chest are kids' alphabet letters that spell worthy. And he's 18, and then he's next to another boy who's also 18. And I was interested in these kinds of juxtapositions. Well, what does 12 look like next to 18? then at the same time too, I was also interested in using markers that we're all familiar with in terms of classical imagery. When we think about children in classical paintings, we immediately go to, like, say, I was thinking a lot about like the way cherubs are described. You know, there's a lot of luminosity in the skin. There's lots of pinking, right? And so I was thinking about what would, and at the same time too, like much earlier in my practice, I had made a number of heads, or I don't like to refer to them as portraits, where they kind of referenced skin lightening. And I started to also around this time think about skin lightening as a kind of political act. If I come from a social rank within the society that is deemed invaluable simply because of the shade of my skin, what does it mean then as a political act to literally erase myself into presence, to use my skin as a point of light and illuminosity, to lighten myself so that you see me? So I was thinking about also too those connections between that and the ideas of illumination that are often talked about in when we think about like religious paintings. And so then each of the children also have a halo around them. I don't know if we have a detail of any of these images. We don't. But one of the key things that also happens within these images that they're all shot up. So they have polka dot patterns that are cut across them, across their faces, across the background, as a way of referencing an act of violence that has happened to these bodies while they're sitting just gazing back at you. And then there are a number of other images where there was a title of one of them called "They Were Just Hanging Out," and it was literally a group of about 17 to 20 kids just in a large group shot that almost seemed as if they were like they were getting ready for a class photo, but they weren't quite focused. So some people are looking off, chatting to each other. Or there was another one where I had two boys just come and sit on the set, and just before that, they started picking up all the toys on the floor that they'd never discovered before, or they'd never seen before. And then all of a sudden, the sense of like play and wonderment. And these were two 18-year-old boys. One of them, their birthday was actually on that day. And, so it was like, we all know these moments. We all understand what it means to discover a new toy, even, as children and also too as adults. And just thinking about these very ordinary acts and then presenting that in a space that also seems familiar, a space of play. Right. But within that space of play, something isn't quite right, because we have to contend with the lushness and the beauty and this kind of buoyance that is happening with the images of the children who are being depicted. But then we also have to contend with the holes that are also piercing their body at the same time.
So let's talk a little bit about this idea of body memory or muscle memory. Erika, you've talked about how we carry trauma in our bodies. And Ebony, you've done a lot of work around the idea of conditioning, how toys from the very youngest age prepare us for social expectations and social roles. So maybe we could look at the other installation that you did at the BMA, which is called Made for Kids and comprises 150 hand-embellished toy guns. And we were walking through the American wing of the BMA and saw this painting by Joshua Johnson in which a child is holding a toy gun. And you said that you had an arsenal in your studio of toy guns, right?
What's this? I was like, what's this? What's going on? What's going on right here? And I wasn't aware of Johnson's work at the time. And it's always interesting that sometimes I have these kind of serendipitous moments where I get pulled into something without even understanding like its historical bend, and then somehow it opens up a whole bunch of other passages within the work. So like, for example, you talked about the butterflies earlier, but when we, like there are very specific butterfly. It's the monarch, and the monarch is an endangered butterfly.
Like black people.
Right, and so it begins to hang all kinds of other metaphors onto something that was just being used for quite a long time as just, this is an embellishment that could counter whatever else was going on. But with the Johnson work, I was really struck by how uncomfortable and awkward this child seemed. In his Sunday suit and his red slippers and his dog, desperately trying to get his attention. And then off to the distance, we're seeing a bit of the landscape, which is believed to be, the window looking out at Baltimore, or some part of Baltimore. But I was, for a long time, I've always gone back and forth over the course of my practice, using toys as a point of departure for thinking about ways in which we negotiate ideas around gender, and how we're teaching each other about these things very early on, either in very direct ways or unconscious ways, right? So all boys' toys are about combat, they're about thinking things. A lot of it has to do with like activating the brain, while girls' toys are typically all about nurturing and domesticity. I've always said if I had a little boy, one of the first things he's gonna get is a fucking easy bake oven, because he knows how to. Because cooking is a life skill. It is not a girl's skill. It's not a woman's skill. It's a life skill.
It is.
You're getting snaps.
I'm just real excited that she cussed first, because y'all know my mouth, and I have been doing a good job, but I'm glad it was her,
So yes, the toys have kind of ebbed and flowed throughout my practice, like thinking about these things, and the guns have been a part of that. So when I made hold on, I'm trying to remember the title of the work from the Studio Museum show. They Were Just Boys. At the base of that work were about 26 hand-embellished guns, just kind of splayed at the base with a couple of other toys. But it was predominantly these toy guns kind of echoing what was happening in the picture as they were playing with another, toy gun too. And I thought, it'd be really interesting to kind of continue to explore this object and to build out a pile. Because for years I would always just, I would always go sometimes to Walmart in the middle of the night because I need like a little piece of trim, and then I would like jostle over to the toy section. And it's been interesting to me to also watch how these toy guns have also evolved in such a short time. I was very struck from very early on how very detailed they were. But as time has gone on, they become even more detailed in terms of the sensory actions. Some of these, say for example, in the case of like a toy gun that looks like an M16, it actually bounces. And we're talking about the ones that are like, like bright colored. We're not talking about the ones that are like, what do you call those again? Like the BB guns, right? Those too feel and look a lot like the real thing too. And it's interesting also too how weighted a lot of these things also are too, as a way of helping to condition young people very, very early on, and procuring them for these experiences without really thinking about it. So I just kept thinking about this idea of building an arsenal. So over a number of years, I would just embellish these things and just place them in the corner of my studio, as if I was thinking about like an amassing of toy guns, and like what does that look like, and then how does that act of amassing these toys that also engage in like the procuring of violence, then also lead to this inevitable preparation for participation or fascination in those things much later on in life. And then also too, the materials that I'm using are also really, they're beautiful. There's an adornment that's also happening because there is a true fascination and seduction around guns too. So I was thinking about, well, how could I, like almost embellish it to a point where it almost becomes flattened, right? Because now there's so many of them, but there are also so many patterns that you're having to contend with that they almost seem to lose their volume. So they become also very flattened in the space. And then what does it mean? And then when we walk through the museum and the opportunity to juxtapose this next to the painting as a potential of like opening up this conversation between me and Johnson's work and this depiction of this young boy with his toy who seems very uncomfortable in that moment. What does it mean to thrust these very uncomfortable things in preparing these very young bodies?
It blows my mind. So first of all, I would have been done like 1/3 into the first gun. Like, okay, never mind. Like, this is way too much embellishment to do. And so like to see what you did is just amazing. And then also, this thing about conditioning your body, right? So we don't store trauma in the part of our brain where we have language. And so that's often why it's very hard to talk about things we've gone through. So a really good therapist will instead give you art therapy and music therapy and things like that, because we store trauma in our bodies mostly and in our memories. And so it's why if somebody like goes to touch your arm, you'll jump and you don't really know that it's connected to the abuse you had when you were a child. You just know you don't like to be touched, but it's because that trauma is stored in your body, right? And so I learned that about trauma. And then when I went to do the TED Talk, one of the things that they make you do is they don't want you to freak out the first time you're on this big, gigantic stage in the dark with the light shining on you on this red dot. And so a day or so before, you have to come and be in that space on the stage and do your whole speech. And they say it's because they want you to have body memory so that the next time you come out, your body will remember. So if it only takes one time for you to stand in front of 1,000 people, imagine what it's doing if you've been playing with guns ever since you were little. Right? How much your body is just getting used to pulling triggers and not thinking about what that actually means, but your body gets used to how it feels and then believes that it's fun. Right? And so and then to make it just like so beautiful and such a contrast to this little boy who looks like he's gonna grow up and be a psychopath, it's just like and they gave him a gun when he was this big. You know what I mean? Like, it's just like, what?
Which on the flip side also takes us back to the sacred space ritual. Right. The idea that what if you practice? What if you form another muscle memory?
Exactly, because we get good at whatever we practice, right? So if you have a body memory of every time there's a murder, you go to that space and you kneel on the ground and you put your forehead to the ground and you touch it and you, like, that is a different kind of body memory. And all of this has to play into the evolution of who we are becoming as human beings, right? So if as humans we are evolving into this thing that is very familiar with violence and thinking violence is fun and celebrating it at every turn, that's turning us into something. Well, it has turned us into something. Let's not even act like it hasn't. It has already turned us into something very ugly.
I believe we have a beautiful audience who may have questions and a very few minutes left. Can we take any questions? Dave has the microphone. Over here.
In looking at your, oh, I guess I can stand a minute. In looking at the exhibit with the shoes, I also thought about when I was growing up in Philadelphia, and I think it's probably in most cities, but when somebody is killed with the gang violence of some kind, their shoes are hung over the, and I was just wondering if that was also in part of what your thoughts were when you were putting that together.
So I always, so in a lot of my earlier work and even the show at the Perez, I've always used shoes because I always felt like, just traversing the street, sometimes not even looking up, but just looking down, like there's always remnants of the presence of somebody having once been there. And I always think it's interesting that when it's a foot of shoes, it's just a foot, so what happened to that other foot? Or a slipper, what happened to that other slipper? Don't get me started on a tumbleweed, that's a whole other thing. But I've always thought that the shoes, because it requires the presence of a body in order to activate it, when that presence is absent, that there is something haunting about that. And then so in the case of the tapestry that's in the gallery, these were things that I was definitely thinking about, but also too, connecting that back again to to the children who I'm referencing, the fact that they're glass and they're frosted when we think about Cinderella and the glass slipper, right? So there are, there's something about those shoes that almost seem fantastical, there's something about it that almost I think is like locked in our memory somewhere. Yeah. And then there's a recent in the Perez show, there's a work of mine that's there that has 757 pairs of women's shoes, all hanging from the ceiling, and it's called Stars, and they're dipped in black glitter. Because I was really interested in this idea that when you see the shoe on the shoe line, they're always male shoes. So it makes me wonder, well, what happened, what has happened to the markers for women's bodies in public space? I also think that the act of memorializing that happens on a level that is personal. So somebody who loved that person, who knew that person, decided on where that would happen and said that needed to happen in a public space, that somebody who may not have known that person is forced to take note and to wonder. And then also too, I've always thought it was interesting thinking about the pair of shoes against the sky, that it marks the sky in the same way that a star does. So that's part of the reason why I made that work that's also at the Perez. But definitely, these kinds of languages are definitely things that I've been thinking about for some time.
Another one back right there.
Hello, Ebony. It is an honor to witness you speak about your work. My question for both of you, and it's really also an honor to meet you, is how do you guys create this sort of work which is so heavy? What type of self-work or rituals or things that you do to kind of maintain your, what's the word?
You want a lie or the truth?
Because
I can give you something that sounds real good.
No, I want to hear the truth because I'm also an artist, and my brother was murdered in 2014, and I dreamed of a body of work to create in honor of him, and I couldn't get past the first one. Like, it just broke me. So I'm curious, when you amass such brilliant, body of work, and you doing this consistently, how are you processing this?
So in real life, I don't do as much self-care as I should. I just started therapy again yesterday, and the assignment that the therapist gave me was to refill myself. on a consistent basis. Like this week, to pay attention to how much I pour out into the world and to intentionally pour back into myself, because it's not something I've been doing as much as I need to. So I had been doing like regular people self-care, and then October to November, I was like very depressed at the end of this last year. And I didn't understand, and I hadn't been that depressed since 2004 when I had a suicide attempt. So I was very confused about like, why am I this depressed for this long suddenly? But it wasn't sudden, because I'd been also now more just personally engaging with murder for a year and a half, right? And I hadn't, and so I was still doing the, you gotta drink water sometimes, because who wants to pee as much as water makes you pee? Nobody. So you don't drink as much water as you should. And you know what I mean? And I got one chakra balance in, and I'm like, that changed my life. Haven't been back since. You know what I mean? Like, and so I was doing like just the regular, not really respecting for real that I have to do you face murder every day level self-care and find out what does that mean for me. Also understanding just who I am in my own purpose, right? So what balance might look like to other people might not look the same for me, because I literally have a life of extremes. From the time I was born in extremes. And so I have always been able to hold. My parents joke that when I was a little person, I was either laughing really hard or crying really hard, except when I was doing both at the same time. Right? And so, like, I've been processing that a lot. Like, what is it that I experience these extremes, and I have the capacity to hold both extremes in my body? But that's necessary if you are going to inspire an entire city to love life and to be peaceful. You know what I mean? And so I'm learning to respect that if my body is going to keep up with my soul and with my spirit, then I have to honor that my body needs a certain kind of care, that my mental health needs a certain kind of care, my emotions need a certain kind of care. I need to be honest about how lonely it feels to be celebrated sometimes. I need to be honest about how lonely it feels to be the person that gets called when murder either goes up or goes down. They don't even call the mayor half the time, but my phone rings, you know. And so, like, while I appreciate it and I take the responsibility very seriously, because I do understand that there are mostly negative narratives, right, about Baltimore and about violence. So sometimes I feel guilty if I just don't feel like doing that interview, because I now know only the negative narratives are going to be told if I don't also take a mic and do the interview, right? And so what does that kind of balance look and feel like? So I am right now working on pouring into myself. So I did things like I went and got my hair real cute today. I'm planning, so there are 6 of us organizers for the ceasefire. I have planned our first annual squad retreat. And so from tomorrow through Sunday, we are going to be at the Hyatt in the Harbor, just pouring into ourselves. And I got all kinds of surprises.
They're going to call you there.
Yeah, no, I'm not there. I'm going to be under a different name, like Bonquisha or something. Y'all will not be able to. But anyway, so what I want to say about it, though, to you, is I want to encourage you to move at your heart's pace. You know, like there are things that you know your soul is calling you to do, but then you go to do it and your body is like, girl, you crazy. I'm not doing that. And so be patient with yourself. Have compassion with yourself. Yes, it's going to crack you wide open. And I lost my brother as well. I feel like we need a club for siblings who've lost siblings to violence. And my mother often reminds me that when you crack wide open like that, it's an opportunity for light to shine out into the world from you, but also for you to absorb light in. And so specifically because you're trying to do something to honor your brother, that cracking open will mean that his light that still exists will have more of an opportunity to pour into you while you are creating whatever it is you are creating with him. And so y'all will be experiencing a new part of your relationship. Death ends a body, not a relationship.
Do we have time for one more?
Yes.
Yes? Okay, one more. Maybe over here? Thank you, Emily. Sure.
Thank you. To Miss Ericka, shout out to Westside.
Hey!
Yes. Miss Ebony, I had a question about the work you referenced as the heads, but you didn't like to refer to it as portraits. And I was wondering why that was, if you could tell us a little more about that.
Yeah, well, I think that, I don't like to refer to them as portraits because I think portraits are specific and they are about an individual. And I think that when we are dealing with or we're thinking about things that are communal, it is really important for us to get past the individual. It is important for us to engage the individual, but look beyond that, right? So I use the word head. I mean, other people have described them as portraits, which is fine. I'm not like protesting it or whatever. People are gonna write what they need to. But I think that there's a kind of specificity that word holds that I was not necessarily interested in. And in many ways, I'm still not interested in. Because for me, again, when we think about the images that are behind us, I could have easily have named each of the works after the child. And then it becomes about that child, and then somehow it's like, oh, that's that person. There's no need for me to own that and hold that as somebody who is entering the work and encountering these bodies for the first time. I want you to think about, well, what other persons look like this that I may encounter in my day-to-day. When I walk out onto the street, how does engaging this image when I come into this space then force me to think differently about this person who I'm now randomly having to engage? And how is that then also forcing me or triggering me to raise questions about the way I participate in this? And for me, it's not just about, I'm talking to white people. I'm talking to all of us because all of us are culpable in that. That's why it's systemic. Right. Each and every one of us are in one way or another participating in our own devaluing. And it happens in conscious and unconscious ways. And so I see the work as a way, in many ways I kind of describe the work almost as a Trojan horse, right? So if this is something that you decide to sit with and you decide, you know what, I'm gonna get that. I'm gonna put it in my home. And I got it because, ooh, that's really pretty. Well, you're going to have to contest with those shots running through the child's face. And if you choose to stay within the surface of that, then it says so much about where you are. And it says so much about your lack of awareness and self-questioning in relation to that, and even more so in relation to everything else that exists around that.
So I want to thank you all for being here. I want to ask you both, so just in closing, see Ebony's show if you haven't seen it yet. It's up until April 7th in the Berman Textile Gallery and then across the way in the American Wing. And Erika, is there anything we should be looking out for, supporting for Ceasefire weekend?
Absolutely. Okay, so the next Baltimore Ceasefire, Baltimore Peace Challenge weekend. So this is about you saying how peaceful can I be on purpose for 72 hours. Good luck with that. But everybody is doing it with you, so we're upholding one another. But it is Mother's Day weekend, May 10th, 11th, and 12th. And so it's not just about everybody being peaceful, it's also about celebrating life. So be thinking about how your organization, a group you're affiliated with, what things can you host and plan something that weekend to celebrate life, and then contact us and we'll put it on the calendar. Also on April 1st, Hug Don't Shoot is hosting Hands Across Baltimore. And so literally what we're trying to do is have people holding hands on North Avenue from Hilton to Milton. That's the entire stretch from east to west. So at 6 o'clock, you can literally show up anywhere on North Avenue and get in line and hold somebody's hand. If you need more structure than that, Baltimore Ceasefire is responsible for 2 blocks. So we're trying to sign up 100 people. We have 20 so far. So we need 80 more people. We are responsible for filling from West North Avenue at Elamont to North Longwood. So if you meet us at 6 o'clock on West North Avenue in Elamont, we'll all, be there holding hands, and we will have taken care of our responsibility. But this is the vision of Val Jenkins of Hug Don't Shoot, to stand against violence on April Fool's Day, right? That is not a game. It looks like something that you're like, and now y'all traumatized by going to see us too, because of the... I didn't see it, but my children keep telling me all of their trauma triggers now. We can't even hold hands. But it's not right. To do it on April Fool's Day is like the defiant act, to say that it's not a game. It's not something that is a pretend, that we need to be standing visually holding hands against violence in our city. And so if you are able to do that, please come.
Thank you, Erika. Thank you, Ebony.
Thank you. Thank you, guys.